Great. So yeah, I hope the video can give you more like a general idea or understanding about the composting. And if you have some questions, I believe you might have some questions after the video. So I will now pass the time to Henry, and he's going to share more with you about composting principles and the what's and how's when you're doing composting, and things to note if you're planning to embark on a composting project. So thank you, Henry. Now I'll pass the time to you.
So hello everyone, thank you for attending our workshop today, and I hope you gain some insight from the first video that we've shown just now. So I want to start a poll now. Can Venus help so that we can know your experience and or some insights of composting of each individual?
Sure. So let me share.
Can you guys see the polls? There are 3 questions you can scroll down. Feel free to type in your question or check the box so that we know your experience of composting. So there are 3 questions. The first question is, have you ever tried composting, whether it's at home or at community farm or at school? The second question is, what do you put into the compost pile? It is a multiple choice question. You can choose more than one answer. For the third question is, how do you rate the level of difficulty of composting at home? And it's not a multiple choice question, but you can choose the level of difficulty: easy, medium, or difficult. I'll give you guys 30 more seconds to answer the questions. I saw some of you type in others for the materials that you put in the compost pile. Can you tell us what do you put into the compost pile if you're choosing others? In the chat box, can you let us know what you also put in the compost pile?
Yeah.
Garden leaves. Okay. Yeah, I think most of you think that composting at home is quite difficult. Yeah, coffee grounds. Yeah, sure. I think that's it. Can we show the statistic?
Sure. Now we'll end the poll, and then I will share the results.
Yeah. So I guess the majority of us don't have the experience of composting. Most of us use unused veggie parts from the, for example, the kitchen scraps, some unused parts, and most of us choose difficult. Yeah, I want to check the chat box. Some of you also use coffee grounds, use paper, cooking oil also to do composting. That's interesting. Yeah. Can you finish? Just save the results so that we can also to reuse this result
sure.
End of the video. Yeah. So I want to start the workshop today. Let me share my screen first. Can you guys see my screen? Hey Venus, can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So basically, I want to show you the very beginner level of composting at home today, so you can understand what is compost and the composting process, and learn about different methods that is applicable at home, and also the science behind composting, what temperature you can get, what is the ratio of materials you can put into the compost bin, the benefits of composting, and also the steps and materials that you need to turn the food scraps into a usable and nutritious compost.
Great. Henry, do you mind presenting your PowerPoint?
Am I not presenting the PowerPoint?
It's the small size version.
Okay. Let me check again. Okay. Is it better now?
Still the same, but maybe you can enlarge the
Is it better now?
Oh, yeah, now, yeah,
Okay.
that's okay. Thank you.
No problem. So what is composting? Because you can see on the left picture on the slide, it is a bin full of vegetables, unused parts, as you guys mentioned. We can turn them into a usable soil-like structure in 2 to 3 months' time if you do it in an appropriate condition. So basically, composting is a process that mimics nature piling up in a natural forest. There's a dry leaves, there's a natural endless recycling nutrients from dried leaves into soil in the compost, so that the nutrients are sustainably used in a natural environment, so that it mimics a natural piling up organic matter inside the composting pile. And there are numerous conditions that we have to meet in order to let the microorganism or bacteria to thrive in a composting pile, so that we can break the organic materials slowly but effectively. So why should we do composting in Hong Kong or in urban cities or at home? Basically, if you have a farm or if you are interested in urban agriculture, you can reuse the compost in your community farm or garden. Improve the soil structure, because most of us start urban farming with peat moss or artificial soil that might not be sustainable in the future. If you're starting a farm with expensive or external inputs, that is not going to be sustaining the urban farm or your own garden farm. So if you use compost, it improves the soil moisture retention and improve the structure along the years. And it can benefit the plants because it can boost the yield, not only boost the yield, and also the natural defenses against pests and disease, so that you don't have to necessarily buy expensive pesticide that is going to be harm the crops or your dieting or your food. And also compost balance soil pH, as many phenomenon is that this acid rains or many it's going to be contaminating the soil, as compost that is high in charged ions. It can buffer the soil or the peat moss in your garden planter during times of fluctuation in acidity or alkalinity, so that it can remain at a very stable pH, so that most crops can thrive in that range. For most crops that thrive is around 6.5 to 7. So when there's a fluctuation, if you're adding something, you can control the rain with high acidity, so that when you're adding more compost, it won't drop its pH value lower than 6.5, so that most crops can thrive in that pH zone. And also compost saves a lot of recycled resources, which otherwise end up in our landfills. As our first video mentioned, well, we're producing 3,600 tons of food waste in Hong Kong. If we can turn them, or if only 1% of that food waste, we can use that amount of food waste and we turn them into compost for our own urban agriculture, community farms, our own garden farms. The main idea is decentralized. We're not trying to relying on the government centralized recycling facilities. If we can do it in our own balcony, in our own kitchen, which I'm going to show you how to avoid smells or pests in our kitchen, we can turn them into our compost. We can produce a lot of food within limited public spaces, and it's extremely rewarding. I'm not sure if I've shown you before. This is the worm compost that I've been doing during my work from home time in February. This is vermicomposting.
Oh, yeah.
I'm using this little food box to make compost. I've weighted it this morning. It's about there's 50 grams of vermicasting in this, and you can add it into your planters or community farm. But this is only for just me as an individual. If all of us, 7 million people in Hong Kong doing this small steps, we can create a lot of compost. So I want to show you what to add into the compost pile and what not to. So we can divide the composting materials into 3 big categories. The first one is green or fresh matter. The second one is brown dry matter, and the last is things that we should avoid. So I want to talk about the first one, the green matters. When you use soft green plants, grass clippings, in moderation, not to put into too much grass clippings because they are high in water content, raw vegetable unused parts, fruit cores and fruit peelings or eggshells. You can also add in tea bags, but you have to be careful not to add in non-nylon one because you want to avoid adding microplastic or plastic into the compost pile. And also tea leaves, and some of us mentioned in the chat box coffee grounds. But I want to here's a tip not to put too much coffee grounds into the composting pile because coffee grounds are quite acidic and it might not provide a good environment for the composting bacteria to form its action in the composting pile. And also for brown materials, you can use cardboard, waste paper. You can also use hay, straw, shredder paper, some garden leaves that you collected from your garden, woody plant shoots, tough hedge clippings, fallen leaves, and wood ash. If you are handling your fallen leaves in your own garden by burning them, you can collect them wood ash or the leaf ash, which is very high in potassium, and also benefit the crops at its flowering stage, can boost its yield of fruit production. And the last category is to avoid is they are meat, bones, fish, seafood, some dairy products, cooked food, non-biodegradable products such as plastic, aluminum, and plants with disease or pests. And the last is charcoal and BBQ ash. So I want to highlight some the key points here because we're not discouraging you to not putting cooked food. The reason why is if we're only adding fresh materials such as green parts or raw vegetables, you are omitting a lot of waste that you cannot actually turn them into food waste. But in a home setting, it is very difficult to, you have to balance the amount of smell, pests that may incur when you're doing your own composting pile. And also you want to, because if you're also adding compost in your own planters, you want to make sure your compost is not contaminated with toxic bacteria. So I want to highlight this here because you don't want to add in meat, bones, fish here because they might contain E. coli or any bad bacteria when you are storing them. So it is best to avoid adding them into your own compost pile at home. So as for plants with disease and pests, make sure you check them if they are full of fungus or any disease or any pests such as the butterflies, worms in there. Best not to add them because they may thrive inside the composting bin and they may eat up the vegetables in the composting pile before the bacteria actually degrades them. So it is best to make sure you're not adding these materials inside your composting pile. So there are many types of composting. There are two big categories, home or commercial one. So I want to highlight 5 types of composting you can do at home. The first one is hot composting. It generally is to put in the right amount of ratio carbon to nitrogen composting pile into a metallic mesh or any wooden cardboard mesh. The carbon pile, the composting pile will generate heat in the process, and they will heat up to 60 degrees so that it generates a smoke, as you can see on the photo. So in this type of composting, they can produce a mature compost in 2 to 3 months, depends on your own country climates. And the second one is cold composting. It's very similar to hot composting, but cold composting, you just add in everything that is suitable for composting without measuring the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So for hot composting, it's best to maintain a ratio from 30 to 1, 30 carbon to 1 nitrogen ratio. And this is roughly the optimum ratio for doing the composting at home. But I'll show you how to calculate the ratio in later parts. And as for co-composting, it might take ages, 2 to 3 years to break down all materials inside the pile or the bin, because it might not heat up evenly or effectively as in hot composting. But the advantage is you don't have to maintain or turn or to stir the composting pile regularly. You just leave it there, and then it will take years to compost or reach its maturity. And the third one is vermicomposting, as I have in here. So it's a composting method that is aided with the addition of worms. So the worms will eat the fungus, degrading the vegetables, and it will fasten the duration of the composting process. But it also generally it takes longer than hot composting, from 4 to 6 months. So for leaf composting, this is a composting method that is using only leaf compost. For composting, there is very limited nitrogen content in leaves. So if you have limited ingredients at home, you can only use leaf. You can try leaf composting at home. But the outcome or the output of leaf composting is not very satisfactory, because they're very low in nutrients. You may not you can use the leaf compost as a mulching, but you cannot use it as a soil conditioner or a fertilizer. And for the last one is Bokashi composting. It is actually a fermentation process rather than composting, but most people do it. It is divided into 2 stages. The first stage is fermentation, and the second stage is composting in the soil. Basically, you use effective microorganism. It is a bag of organism with molasses and rice, so that there are bacteria living on the rice or and with the addition of molasses, they can thrive in this effective microorganism. If you put it in the veggie parts, or you can also use the advantages of this composting method is that you can add cooked meat or fish materials inside, because they can you kind of fermented the compost rather than degrade them. And for the second stage, you can put it in the soil, and the bacteria in the soil is going to be degrading the semi-fermented Bokashi compost, and it will turn it into a very, very nutritious compost. I want to show you the maturation process of composting. So basically, the composting process is divided into 3 stages. The first stage is mesophilic, the second stage is thermophilic, and the last stage we can put the cooling and stabilization stage into 1 stage, so we can have 3 stages. So for the first stage, it is mesophilic. It is when the mesophilic bacteria thrive. When you're adding your materials in the composting pile, it generally is in 25 degrees Celsius, that is room temperature. But it slowly, the mesophilic bacteria thrive in that composting pile, and it will heat up the composting pile to 40 to 50 degrees. So it will start to degrade some very simple content, such as sugar, amino acids in the of the food scraps. And then in later stage, it will enter another stage that is called a thermophilic stage, and the thermophilic bacteria will dominate at this stage, and it will help the composting pile reach 50 to 60 degrees. And at this higher temperature range, it will start to degrade contents that is difficult to degrade in the composting pile, such as cellulose, the cell wall of the plants, and also some more complex sugar in this stage. And then last, it will cool after the composting pile reach 50 to 60 degrees. It will slowly, in a month or so, reach to a plateau stage that is we call cooling period or maturation period, where the mesophilic bacteria dominates again below 45 degrees Celsius. So any undegraded or incomplete degradation, it will happen again. So that any sugar or any amino acids that is not degraded in the previous stages, they will dominate and degrade it in this stage. And then finally, it will reach a stabilization stages. Now, we'll walk you guys through how to determine the stability of compost at the later slides. So there are many reasons or many criteria to how helps the composting pile to reach its maturity in a faster time. It depends on the types of microorganism. As I've mentioned before, if you're adding Bokashi and EM effective microorganism into your composting pile, it can definitely fasten the duration of the composting process. And also, it is also you have to be cautious of the amount of water content inside of composting pile, because if your composting pile is too dry or too muddy, the composting pile may become anaerobic. And as I've mentioned, anaerobic is rather hard to control at the home setting. So best if you are adding too much vegetables into your composting pile, it will turn anaerobic. And for temperature, you have to check temperature of the composting pile regularly. If you do have a thermometer at home, you can check which stage the composting pile is already located. If your composting pile is in between 40 to 50 degrees, and you're only starting the composting pile for the first 10 days, it is definitely on the first stage of the composting pile. So you can check the maturity of the composting pile in many different with different tools and methods. It is also important to maintain your volume pile into a 1 meter cubic size, because now you want to ensure there minimum heat loss from the composting pile, but also if your volume of the composting pile is too large, that there is an uneven distribution of heat in the composting pile. So it is important to remain 1 meter cubic, but that is for very large farms or community farms. It is very hard to have a balcony that is 1 meter cubic in size. So that is an ideal stage, but in a home composting stage, you can just add in whatever you have food scraps from your kitchen or from your office, just adding into it. So it is also important to cut or to prepare the ingredients or materials to put into the composting pile before you start composting. It is best to cut the vegetables into 3 to 5. I'm not sure if you see the vegetables from 3 centimeters to 5 centimeters. That is a great size for bacteria to degrade the food scraps. It is also important to stir in or to mix in the composting pile to introduce more oxygen, so that the composting pile is remain at a aerobic condition, so that it won't be anaerobic, which is going to be releasing sulfur, which is unpleasant smell at your own house. So as I've mentioned, it is best to remain the carbon to nitrogen ratio from 30 to 1 ratio. So here's a tips on how to common C/N ratio for composting. So for food cores or food pills, they are generally 35 to 1. That is quite ideal for starting composting. For garden waste such as weeds, that is 25 to 1, and wood ashes 23 to 1. And for coffee ground, it has a high nitrogen content, so that you have to be careful when adding in this kind of materials inside a composting pile. So for dry leaves, as you guys mentioned in the chat box, is 60 to 1. Fresh leaf is 40 to 1. So how do we calculate the C/N ratio from your food scrap? You do have to, as I've mentioned, vegetables, they are 12:1 in general. So 3 parts of vegetables and then 1 part of hay. So you get just add in the carbon numbers on the top of the equation, 12, 12, 12, and 80, then divided that by 4 parts, so that it reaches a very ideal C/N ratio that is 29:1. So we'll be sharing this PowerPoint to you. If you are not only using vegetables and hay, you can try your own composting formulas so that you can find which is best to compost. But it is best to remain 25:1 to 30:1. That is a very optimum C/N ratio for composting. So here's another tip for assessing the maturity of the compost. So when you are piling up at your compost at home, you can check when you have been doing this for 2 to 3 months. You can check this compost if they are soil-like, that is fluffy and black in color, and whether it does have a faint soil smell. If it smells very like urine or sulfur, you might best to add in more carbon material so that the sulfur or the unpleasant smell is an indication of too much nitrogen content in your composting pile. And also, if your composting pile you have been doing this for 2 to 3 months, and it also remain at a room temperature, it is also an indication of that the composting pile has reached to its maturity. So there are many types of composter in Hong Kong, in various places in the world. You can use a wire fence if you do have a big balcony, or you're doing this at a community farm. You can use a wire fence. You can set it up at the farm with 4 metallic mesh. You just put in everything into the wire fence. But the advantages is that there's a free flow of oxygen in and out of the wire fence. But the disadvantage is that you cannot control the water content, because if you're adding in the vegetables or other watery content, they will leak out from the wire fence, and it also create unpleasant fluids that is floating in and out if you're doing it in the balcony. So I would suggest, if you do have a balcony that is big enough for wire fence, you can definitely set up a wire fence at home for composting. But if you have more budget, you can buy a plastic tumbler from Rooftop Public or other companies in Hong Kong. And the advantage of using a plastic tumbler is that it is in black in color, so that it can absorb more heat, so that it can heat up the composting pile more effectively, rather than the heat generated from the bacteria. And it's also very you can move it around if you're collecting for collection of garden waste. And for the DIY old plastic storage container, if you are low in budget, like me, I'm using this with a food box, low in budget, you can create some holes on the side to introduce more airflow for the container, and you can just do it with an unused. If you check your home, if you have any unused or any old plastic container, you can use that for composting at home. So before we start our composting, it is best to prepare or handle our food materials before you start composting. As I've mentioned, you have to cut the food waste or the food scrap into 3 centimeters to 5 centimeters, so that the action or the degradation action from the degrading bacteria, it is most effective. And then you stack your green and brown materials in layers. Here's a tip. I would suggest you to add peat moss or soil on the bottom of the composting bin first, because it is so that it can absorb or any excessive water content from the pile when you're doing your composting pile, so that they won't leak out or drench the first bottom layer of the composting pile. So when you have prepared your own brown and green materials, just stack the first layer, the bottom layer with browns, green browns as the PowerPoint here. You can first layer brown materials, you can green materials in layers, so that the nitrogen and the carbon, it creates the so that the carbon is covered with a nitrogen layer. It's a very effective way to do it. And then you have to turn the pile regularly. As I've mentioned, the brown and green materials, they are layered in, and they will not be mixed by itself when they're during degradation. So you can use a metallic fork to introduce the top layers and to the bottom layer, so that if you're doing this to mix it, so that the heat will be redistributed more evenly during the composting period. And if you do have a thermometer or any advanced tools, you can measure the temperature so that you can keep on track whether your composting pile is doing well or not. If the composting pile is not heating up to 40 degrees, there might be some problem with the composting pile. You might want to add a black plastic sheet on the composting container. There might be too much heat losing from your own composting container, as you can see on the first on the right side of the PowerPoint. Since this is blue in color, there might be some heat losing from the container. You might want to wrap it with a black plastic so that more heat is trapped inside the container. So I want to give you another tip on where the composting site selection. You want to choose a site that is well ventilated, that's also shaded. It has great access to water and raw materials. It has an ample space for you to move around the food waste that you've collected with your own plastic bins. The reason why it has to be well ventilated, because if it's otherwise, there might not be enough oxygen content can be introduced to the composting pile, so that you have to keep. So the best selection site you can use is the balcony, the windowsill on your kitchen that is close to the window, so that there is a free flow of oxygen nearby. So you can also you have to make sure you have water hose nearby, so that when you have to add in water, you don't have to walk with your water bucket back and forth. And also at best, if you can also put a few 2 to 3 bins that are storing your green and brown materials on the side, so that you don't have to walk too often. So at last, I want to show you the benefits of when your compost has already matured. What can you do with the compost? You can use the compost as soil amendment or fertilizer, because the compost you use, they contain plentiful of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's the 3 great ingredients, or the fundamental elements for agriculture. You can also use the compost as a mulch, because they're black in color. They can keep the soil warm. They can also protect the soil from losing too much water content. You can also use it as a liquid fertilizer. You can mix the composted or the mature compost with water, so that you can water the nutrients from the compost will get into the water, so you can use it as a liquid fertilizer. Because sometimes if you're not doing the compost appropriately, the compost might be too high in nutrients. You might burn the roots or the plants if you're adding it directly on the plants, so that you might want to consider using mixing water with the fertilizer and then turn it into a liquid fertilizer. So as I've shown you guys before, I have a vermicomposting food box in here, and we'll be doing a vermicomposting workshop in the third workshop. After this workshop, you might want to check out. We'll be teaching you how to do it hands-on with worms and lead you step by step how to do it vermicomposting at home in the most effective way. So there are basically 3 layers in a vermicomposting bin. The first bottom layer is soil or some air holes or the holes for drainage. The middle layer is dedicated for the earthworms, so that the earthworms will be moving on top to the vegetables on top of the earthworm, so they will going up. They will go up and then eat the vegetables, and then they will poop in the middle layer. And the top layer is a light shielding cover. So in this food box, I have, I'm not sure you can see it clearly. So the light shielding cover is a yellow plastic on the top. As earthworms, they're very sensitive to light and change in the environment, so that you want to cover the vermicomposting bin or the food box so that they're not scared away, they're not doing their job in the composting bin. You can collect the vermicasting after the worms have done the job. You can use a sieve. You can put everything from the vermicompost bin, put it into the sieve, and then any moist or any aggregated content there at the vermicasting, you can collect it, the content, what is left inside the compost, what is left inside the sieve, you can use it, add it back to the community farm or your own planter. And this is the little, I want to show you the little trial vermicomposting at home that I've been doing this month. I've been using, previously I've been adding mostly fruit peels or fruit cores, because the earthworms, they like sweet and sugary content. But in this month, I'm mostly using spinach and cabbage, the leafy greens, for feeding my own worms. But the results are quite successful, because they do lay some eggs on the side. As you can see here, they have already laid some eggs, and they will mature in 3 to 4 weeks time. And within 10 days or so, they have already eaten all spinach. And I don't know if you can see some worm casting already on top of the shredded paper here. The black little dots is the worm casting that they left on the carbon. So for earthworms, I'm using regulars, and I will show you where to buy. If you do have question on where to buy this earthworms specifically for composting, you can let us know in the chat box. I will PM you or answer your inquiry in the email. So for leaf composting, as I've mentioned before, we only use leaf as the only material of composting. It is very slow to mature, and it does not contain a lot of nutrients, because they are mainly very high in nitrogen content. But they are very good soil improver, as they contain a lot of humus if you're doing it correctly. You can also use this as a mulch. You can reduce the amount of water content losing from your own soil. And for Bokashi compost, as I've mentioned, it's a 2-stage process. The first stage is fermentation, and the second stage is composting in the soil. So the first stage happens in the Bokashi bin, where you put beneficial microbes in the bin, and then also the food scraps, and you cover it with a sieve and then a lid, so that it creates an anaerobic environment, an acidic environment. I'm not sure if you have tried pickles or the Korean kimchi. It's very similar in action, so that the food scrap is fermented, but they are not completely broken down. it has very limited flower odors because if you're adding some fruits or orange, it might create a very sweet and fruity smell, and oftentimes it don't create a very bad smell in the process. And I'm not sure if you can see the tap on the bottom of the Bokashi bin. There's a tap on the faucet on the bottom of the bin. During the Bokashi composting action, there is some liquid might release from the food scrap, from the food cores, from the vegetables. You can collect them. You can check the faucet regularly to see if there are any liquid fertilizer that you can use for feeding your plant. But you have to make sure that before you adding this liquid fertilizer, you have to dilute the liquid in a 100:1 ratio, so that you're not burning your own crops with this liquid fertilizer. For Bokashi composting, we're going to host it in March. If you're interested on how to get hands-on advice and ideas on how to composting at home, definitely sign up for our second workshop. And I think it's time for Q&A section. And I'm not sure if Guy has any question about composting.
There's a question in the chat room.
Yeah, I think Bas has a question. He asks if we need to layer green brown. Does that mean we cannot just toss all kitchen scraps in the composting bin because the green and brown would get mixed? This is a very good question. If you do have a very big composting bin that is 1 meter high, definitely layer them before you toss all of them into a composting bin, because the green layers will be broken down by the bacteria. They will constantly releasing water content from the green layers, so that the brown layers on the bottom will absorb or buffer at least some water content from the top layer, so that you won't the most bottom layer will not be drained. So if you're doing this in a kitchen setting, you can just, I think it's best to just layer them before tossing all of them. Because I want to also mention that the brown layers acts as a very effective layer, because I'm not sure if you can see in here the shredded paper, there are many air space between the paper. It creates a oxygen layer for the whole pile, so that it won't the action of the microorganism can be more effective. So that if you are adding all brown materials and green materials into, just toss it in the composting bin, all of them will be stacked, so that it might not be aerobic. The condition of the composting bin, it will turn into anaerobic composting bin. We will generate a lot of smell and odors. So it is best to, if you're even doing, for me, if I'm using this 5 centimeter foot box for composting, I'm also layering them in brown and green and brown layers, so that the brown is providing air space, and the green layers is providing nutrients for the providing the energy source for the microorganism to act on. So there's another question from Kaiser. Do we need to add water? If yes, when? It is when, if you are doing, I think it's mostly applicable to add water when you're doing a leaf composting, dry leaf composting, as I've mentioned, because you're not adding nitrogen or the green layers, which is 80 to 90% of water content. If you're only using dry leaves, there might not the bacteria needs a a certain amount of humidity to thrive in the composting pile. So you have to if you in a regular setting, if you're doing this, if I'm having this food box compost, you can just touch top of the compost. If it is moist, if it is too muddy, or if it is too muddy or too wet, you don't definitely not to add in water. But if you feel there's not moist or it's a little bit dry, definitely add in some water over, or just spray some water on the top. That's what I do in my own in my own home.
I think before Kaisa, Billy also asked a question: how to reduce the level of smells during the composting process?
I'm sure how to demonstrate it. The level of smell depends on whether your composting pile has become anaerobic. That is when the urine or the sulfur smell comes in. So it is best to aerate your own composting pile, or adding more carbon layers, or layer them more effectively, so that you want to avoid your own composting pile becoming anaerobic. So my advice is to turn the composting pile in a weekly basis, and then not to add in too much nitrogen content or watery content. You can definitely add in fruit content, a whole fruit core, an orange inside a composting bin. But an orange, there are many juice inside. It will definitely turn the composting pile anaerobic, because the bottom layer might be drenched or drained. So that in that specific liquid layer, they will generate a lot of bad smell from there. So you have to check your water content, the humidity, add in more carbon when your composting pile becomes smelly or urine smell.
And some questions about the pests, like cockroach or flies or worms. Quite concerned about that.
Yeah, I do have some fruit flies thriving in this little vermicomposting pile. I think what we can best to do is to add the lid on top of the composting pile, but leave a gap. Leave a gap for the air to get into the composting pile, so that it won't becomes anaerobic. And another advice is you definitely have to put the composting pile in a clean environment. But for most people, it is cockroach thrives in kitchen. It is necessary. It is actually hard to avoid cockroach getting attracted to the food waste if it is kept in the kitchen.
Right. So it's about the cleanliness of the kitchen, right?
Yeah, this is about the cleanliness of the kitchen. Yeah, but definitely, as I've mentioned, if you're doing this, my advice is I will separate the composting pile with the green and brown materials that I've collected. I won't be putting the brown and also the green materials at the same space with the composting pile, so that they won't move around within this bin, so that they won't be too many cockroach in the kitchen. So my advice is just put the composting pile in the kitchen, but leave the green or the brown materials outside of the kitchen. Right. But I do have pest problem previously, so that I'm actually doing my composting pile in the bathroom. So because it is often very humid and it's dark, so that I'm not putting it too close to the window. And I think my vermicomposting pile are very successful by now. I'm not sure after a month or so what status it will become.
Right.
Another question from Kaiser. During the composting process,
yeah, also
would it
about
attract a lot
flies and worms.
Flies and worms, yeah.
But like, because also I'm having a small composting bin, and what I do is just to check it like every day, just to check. So in case you find there are like flies or worms, like or cockroach, just remove it timely, just to
Yeah.
prevent it spreading all over the place.
I actually see some worms that is not earthworms inside my vermicomposting pile. I just remove the eggs and
Right.
uh, the parents from the composting pile so that uh, it won't get into a infestation stage where you cannot control the pests inside of your composting pile. But it is hard to avoid pests in general.
Sure, you can ask, you can unmute yourself and ask, but just before that, maybe we can answer about the cardboard boxes. Can we use the scraps?
Can the brown layer be scraps of cardboard boxes? Yes, definitely. But you have to cut or shred the cardboard boxes before you put into your composting pile. You have to keep the cardboard stress in between 3 centimeters to 5 centimeters. Yeah, so that if you're directly putting just the whole cardboard into the composting bin, definitely it won't have an effective surface area for the bacteria to add in. Yeah, so my advice is to just shred it before you add into it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it more in the second workshop in March, right?
Yeah, I also want to talk about the addition of newspaper into the composting pile. I've read some research paper that is okay, but some said it's not okay. But personally, I think newspaper the ink. What I'm concerned about is the ink of the newspaper. Some ink on the newspaper that contains some lead on a heavy metal. And if you're using that compost in your own garden or planter, that lead will contaminate your crops, and you might enter our food chain. So I think it's best to avoid adding newspaper directly or for preparing our own composting pile. You can use office waste paper, this kind of brown untreated paper for composting if you're doing this
no ink
at home. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we have another question from Bas. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi Henry, thanks so much for your talk so far. To be honest,
sorry, can't really hear you clearly.
You know?
Can you say again?
1 second.
Thanks.
I
I
cannot hear you.
Can't hear
Can you
you.
hear me now?
Oh yeah,
I hear you.
Okay, great. So to be honest, I'm pretty intimidated by this. It sounds like there's a lot that can still go wrong, getting the proportions wrong, getting pests, and all of this. Do you know if there's like any alternative to doing it myself? Like I'm perfectly happy to collect my kitchen scraps. Can I then just ship them off to somebody else to handle the composting? Is that something that happens?
Yeah, I'm not sure in your location there's a centralized composting facility. Do you have a centralized composting facility at your location?
No, I mean, I would love to my kitchen scraps not contribute to the 3,000 tons of waste every day, but I just everything you've mentioned just sounds really scary. It's sorry, I don't mean to be putting off.
Yeah, I understand.
It sounds like somebody dedicated would be able to pull it off, but just I'm it also sounds like a lot of effort, and if I can outsource that, then Yes. So in answer to your question, no, there's nothing in my building. But I mean, is there a number I can call to set something like that up?
Yeah,
Are you familiar with anything like that?
it might be my fault because I didn't explain. Do you remember the Bokashi composting I've mentioned to you? It is actually anaerobic. It is the only method that I've introduced to you that is anaerobic, and it is covered by a lead. So it is very rare to see infestation in the Bokashi compost. I think what I can suggest you is to try Bokashi composting at home, because it is the Bokashi bin, it is sealed. Unless you open the Bokashi bin, there are no insects getting in to it or getting out from the Bokashi bin. And it is very easy to do. Just get the effective microorganism, the bacteria, and then just add in the food scrap into the Bokashi bin. And you don't necessarily have to layer it, because after you finish the fermentation, you can just give it to your friends, take a hole, and then just put the fermented Bokashi compost in his garden. So I think I'm not trying to scare you, but I think you can be assured that there is still ways to do composting at home without having cockroaches around, or you need to calculate your green and brown materials. If you're not getting it right, the compost will be not usable. So I think I hope that answer your concern or help to assure you. But if you can find a third party or your friends or any community farms, you can collect the green and brown materials and then just give them for free, or so that they can use those natural resources. They can recycle for their own community farming to grow food. And I think that's an alternative to from this all scary condition. Yeah, I think that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bas really asked a very good question, because I believe most of the participants joined today, you're interested in starting your own composting project at home or somewhere, and you want to, you just want to start with like simple steps. And from my personal experience or what I learned from Henry's sharing, I feel like the Bokashi composting, it's somewhat like a more easy composting method for beginners, or I think for general households in Hong Kong to start with, because you just need to get the bin and the Bokashi powder, and then the bacteria inside just will help you to do the process, and you don't have to really be very accurate with the CNN ratio or the green and brown ratio. Correct me if I'm wrong, Henry.
yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Great. So thank you for the questions. Yeah, sure. One more question.
Hi. I live in Lantau, and actually we do have a community where they collect the food waste, and then they ferment it in a big machine, or they break it down in a big machine, and then they send it to the farms. But I also try to do composting at home, and because we are mostly vegetarian, so we have a huge amount of vegetable scraps. And so I do have a big composting bin, like the 1 meter kind. But my question is more on the use of the compost afterwards, because I don't know if it's because I'm using it before it's ready. I find I have that problem where like when I try to use it to grow things, then some things thrive, but most things die. So I had a question about, and then I try to remove all these acidic things, like, if there's any coffee, but the thing is, I want to reduce my waste, just like that. So I actually want to use them too. And at the same time, I have like a leaf bin, and then I find sometimes after 2 years, it's all turned into soil. So I have a question about, is it a matter of if I mix all of these things together, like let's say if I get a Bokashi bin for the more like strong things, like the cooked food, after the fermentation, can I then put it back into the compost or mix it with the leaf compost, so that's actually usable, like for my for the things I try to grow?
Yeah, I think your concern is whether you can mix the outputs of different composting methods. Am I right?
Yeah, and then that would
Yeah.
somehow make the items less like burning, they don't burn everything. Or otherwise I can only use a tiny bit and then I have just this huge amount.
Yeah, I've never tried mixing different types of composting outputs together and then compost it for a longer period. I'm not sure if that's possible, but my concern is whether you are the maturity of your outputs from your leaf compost, whether they are fully mature or not, or if you are you want to further the degradation process. For example, if your leaf compost, as you mentioned, they have been degraded for 2 years, I think they're perfectly matured. You can just use them directly on plants or mix it with water for growing crops. I'm not sure what kind of crops you're growing, but you can, for most crops, they're very adaptive to different composts. But for Bokashi compost, the best method is the best way to use Bokashi fermented compost is just put it back to the soil directly. So I think for Bokashi, it is more applicable to community farm rather than your home garden, because you do need a certain amount of volume to let the soil or let the bacteria in the soil to degrade a big part of Bokashi bean. So for vermicasting, it is perfectly okay to mix it with the leaf compost and then just let them to degrade for a longer period of time, because the vermicasting, they are the poops of the earthworms. They're not completely degraded, but they still need the action of the bacteria to break it down further. So I think for your concern, I think you can use the output of the leaf compost or try vermicasting. You can composting. You can mix the two outputs of these two composting methods together, and then just put it back into your own planters or farm. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, kind of. I think it's like a continuous work in progress. So thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you use 100%. I mean, if you're applying back to your garden, if you're growing something out of using compost, from my understanding or my experience, you have to still mix with soil. So you can't use 100% compost as like the growing medium to grow plant, because I think the pH or some of the content varies, and I think we still have to mix with the potting soil. Yeah, but yeah, I think that's my.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So I'm finding like if I mix it with the soil that looks like kind of bad with the compost, maybe some of the leaf compost, and then I think because I'm not very methodical and scientific, so then sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not good, and some plants will suddenly grow really well and some will just die. So probably I'm not following, I'm not measuring the temperature and the pH like Henry mentioned, and using the fork, and I'm just trying to like wing it, so maybe that's not a good method.
But I understand, like for household, maybe you don't really have the pH, the measuring thing, and I think it's all understandable and it makes sense. But I think, in my personal perspective, it's a great experience. We experience like success and fail, and I think even if we try to make a change and start composting, we will just experience this, and I think it's still a good start, and we just try to apply what we have learned, and maybe we can start from very simple steps, but not like all these. But I think it's still great to have all your questions and Henry's very informative sharing. I believe even we might not be able to apply all these 5 composting types, but at least as we conclude, maybe the Bokashi composting might be a good start. And also we'll talk about it more in the second workshop. And on the third workshop, we'll talk about vermicomposting. And if the situation allowed, we might be able to meet in person. We might be able to share some of the worms with you. Then you can bring home and, try to do the vermicomposting, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, that would be a good start. At least we understand more about composting types and what we have to be aware of. So Henry, do you have other things to add?
Yeah, I think for just to not sure because just earlier you just mentioned sometimes the compost you add into the crops, some die and some not. I think it is great to just start with edible plants such as herbs. They're very adaptive. You just try whether if you're adding compost and then the herbs even they die, definitely there's something wrong with the compost. I think you can definitely try adding them into herbs. So then you can see whether it is your plant not suitable for the compost or there is something wrong with the compost. I think composting and agriculture is kind of a trial and error process. You have to try and do some adjustment, and then you can find the right way to do it. For me, it takes ages, for 2 to 3 years to master or get it right, to get my composting right. But in the meantime, I think it's just not necessarily bad to add in not fully mature compost, because if you do it properly or add a small amount on top of the soil, they will become fully mature when the time comes. So I think don't be frustrated or be disappointed by the failure. I think just keep trying, then you see. And then definitely attend Rooftop Republic's gatherings or workshops. Then we can get some update from each participant.
Yeah.
Then we can learn together as a community. And I think that's what Rooftop Republics do. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think it's a very good reminder, also encouragement. So really appreciate you guys' feedback and also sharing your experience about composting. So I think moving forward, we will also encourage you guys to turn what you have learned into action. So I think maybe Henry, you can stop sharing, and then I can share my screen. And we are almost coming to the end of the workshop, but please stay because we have some surprises for you. And let me share my screen. Yeah. So first of all, we will highly encourage you to start making small changes today after knowing more about composting. And sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So actually, if your living space allowed, you can start composting or continue your composting. As some of the participants shared, you have already having this practice. So we also encourage you to continue or start your urban farming journey if you have a small balcony or rooftop, because we also provide some of the gardening materials for you, and seeds, tools, and grow kits. And thank you for your participation today. We'll offer you a 10% off on our online store, so you can check out the Rooftop Republic online store and check out some of the grow kits and other supplies we provide. And this discount with this promo code Earth to Earth 10, you can have the 10% off, and this discount code is valid till the end of April. And we'd also like to introduce you, not sure if you have heard of Zero Footprint Asia, ZFPA. They're actually supporting, they have some restaurants in this Zero Footprint Asia, and by visiting these restaurants, you're pledging 1% of your bill to help fund the regenerative farming projects in Hong Kong. And so we'll encourage you to take a look, and maybe you have visited some of these restaurants before, and in your bill 1% is to support the local farmers. in this regenerative agriculture project. And also, as we have mentioned a couple of times during the workshop today, if you're interested to learn more, especially to know more about the hands-on like advice, or if the situation allow that we'll be able to meet in person, we can also do some hands-on practice experience together. Feel free to scan this QR code and sign up for our coming 2 workshops, the remaining 2. To recap, it's about the aerobic and anaerobic composting, and then also about vermicomposting, that you'll be able to get in touch with the worms. So these workshops are all for free, so feel free to sign up, and we really hope to see you again. And of course, if you think your families and friends might be interested, you can also share this workshop with them. And last but not least, I think we've already received some feedback from you guys, but we'll also love to know more, and we can, put the records. So please take time. You can fill in the feedback form and let us know what you think. And to thank you for joining this workshop and to let us know your feedback. After you fill in the form, it's a Google form, we'll get your email. And once you submit, we'll send you a free home gardening guide. So in case you're interested in doing more gardening in Hong Kong or at home, at your workplace, I think it's that you can get some gardening tips, or some of the growing advice, especially in the climate of the Hong Kong climate. So after you fill in the survey form, we'll send you the gardening guide to you for free. So yeah, we'll really appreciate to know your feedback and your thoughts about the workshop. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for being so active and engaging in the workshop. And if you have other questions, you can also email us. Yeah, or we can meet again in the coming 2 workshops. So me and Henry will be answering your questions or concern. Yeah, and Henry, anything to add?
Do you want to take a group photo? You guys want to start the video, so we can take